What makes a good recovery coach, and is one right for you? Today on Finding Traction, we talk with Michael Leahy about that very topic. Well, Michael, welcome to the podcast all the way from Georgia, I think, right?
Thank you. Yeah, Vern, all the way from the deep south.
The
And
deep
thanks for
south.
having me, man.
It's great to have you.
It's been a while. We haven't talked to each other in a little bit.
Absolutely. And let me say, this podcast almost never happened because there has been some real friction in our relationship. 2 weeks ago, my team, Cowboys, beat the Atlanta Falcons on basically a last second watermelon kick.
That's right.
And it was just an unbelievable ending. But I knew that you were itching for a revenge game because you're actually from Seattle area, right?
Yeah, and to be honest with you, my true allegiance is my trip. Well, let me give you an example of this. Back in the pre-COVID days, when Seattle came to play Atlanta, this was a couple years ago. My wife and I went to the game wearing Seahawk garb.
Okay, so that really says
So I'm
a
very lukewarm Atlanta fan, kind of a fan because I live here, but when push comes to shove. So my big question to you on this day, Monday, September 28th, is what happened to your Cowboys against the Seahawks yesterday?
Dak choked.
Game which I didn't get to see, by the way, because they make everyone watch the Atlanta game. So it drives me crazy. But what happened?
Last second. It came down to the last second play. Dak slipped and choked. Both him and Zeke had really bad games. And,
really?
Zeke especially. Yeah, no, they wrestle, outshone him. But we keep saying wait for the playoffs. But it brings up the question of coaching.
Yeah.
I wanted to throw this by you.
What a transition. You are the segue king, aren't you?
Man, take the Falcons again. They blew yet another lead to the Bears. Matt's team, the Bears. Do you think that coaching is a part of these last kind of quarter breakdowns from the Falcons 3 weeks in a row and the Super Bowl? Does coaching have to do with that, do you think?
Sure it does. Well, it takes two. And, in my years of being a mentor, which is kind of like coaching, but it's a little different. We'll talk about that. But, I always tell people that, part of the responsibility is on the mentor, of being a good mentor, always being prepared, being present, being there. But the other responsibility is on the mentee. They need to show up ready to do the work. So who knows what the breakdown is? You know how games are.
Well, I think
it takes two to tango.
I think the Falcons just realized, how are we going to screw this up? And Pete Carroll for the Seahawks, he's just the Energizer Bunny over there.
Yeah,
and,
he is. Going on 80 or something, and running around like he's 40. He
just didn't. They always seem to win. The last week they pulled it out on the second play as well against the Patriots. So I guess we think it comes down to coaching, and that is what we're talking about today, which is coaching. Because I don't want to talk about football anymore.
There you go.
Yeah, it's next week though. I will spring eternal again. But tell me a little bit, Michael, about your story, because I think, if you at a cocktail party or whatever, people ask you what you do, and you say, well, I spend time with guys, coaching them and helping them, with guys with sexual brokenness. How did you get into it? And tell me a little bit about your story, because that will explain a lot.
Sure.
And before you do, let me just say this, just as a bit of a point here. Michael has been one of my mentors and also has trained me as a Braveheart certified mentor. So just full disclosure here, I've been a part of their organization and have been trained by him. And so he brings a lot into this relationship. In fact, if you go to the website, bandofbrothers.care, you will see Michael's introduction. So me and Michael have real, just history here, but I'd love to hear a little bit about your story, Michael, because it would really explain a lot as to how you developed a heart for helping guys here.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And thanks so much for having me on this, Vern. It's very exciting to see you doing this podcast. By the way, I'm about to start mine, which is going to be called From Recovery to Redemption.
Excellent.
Which really relates to kind of what we're all about. But so I'll give you more information on that.
Please do.
To share with your folks. It's interesting, Vern. I've been asked questions, as I'm sure maybe you have as well.
Mm-hmm.
If there's anything you could do differently in your life, what would you change? And I have learned that my answer came actually very quickly to that the first time I was asked, which was probably about 10 or 12 years ago. And it's that if I had it to do over, I would have had more mentors in my life. I would have had people who were wiser and further along on the road of life, you know, and I would put myself in being in a more teachable position to really listen and learn from them. And I have a great friend who was our first board member, Reggie Campbell, who started a wonderful wonderful mentoring ministry called Radical Mentoring. And he said he put it this way. He said, mentored men make fewer mistakes. And I'll add to that. I think mentored men make wiser decisions and wiser choices. Because if you think about, when we tell ourselves, gosh, if I only knew then what I know now, right?
Sounds like a country and Western song. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Well, you know that you can't go back in time and inform your younger self. But what about informing other people like you?
Right.
And this was one of the things that, again, just the real birth of this, Vern, came in my recovery. So my backstory is I was raised in a very loving home, a very loving family. Didn't have any past trauma, which kind of makes it interesting that, I mean, I wouldn't say severe like sexual abuse or incest, things like that, which used to be the main marker for sexual addiction. But I developed this on my own through a 30-year growing relationship with pornography. And it was that shiny new thing that you discover as a kid. And, it was just something that I really gravitated towards. So I had a 30-year relationship with pornography that went from being kind of a pastime and something that I was just filling empty time with to a real need because I found that it allowed me to escape negative emotions like being stressed, being anxious, being depressed. I had a time in my life where I just didn't feel like I fit in with my peers. I went from like being the quarterback, being the, kind of the star of the playground to moving to a new school, kind of midway through grade school, and all of a sudden being the outsider, the kid who was picked on and bullied and everything. So I went through a real crisis about the time that I discovered pornography. And it was actually in a gathering with the guys, some of the guys who were bullying me, that I first discovered porn. And from that point forward, promising to keep the secret, don't tell anyone, but we're all out in the playground looking at these pictures of naked women on the backs of playing cards. Don't tell anyone. So by not telling anyone, guess what? I became part of that peer group and the bullying stopped. And so I learned a really important message, which is a foundational part of recovery from any kind of addiction, which is dealing with your core, what we call your core beliefs.
Right.
And an early core belief for me in my relationship with pornography is, porn means kind of laughing at this stuff and laughing it off. And accepting this means I'm accepted in a peer group. So sex equaled acceptance before it ever equaled love or some of these other things that you hear people talking about. So at that point in time, it shifted from being this curious new thing that I didn't understand to really filling a need. And that only grew over time. Of course, through school, through college and all that, it became part of my sexual identity, part of my identity overall, to be sexual and to be a conqueror of women, things like that. But then when I got married and moved into, being a husband and a father and having kids, it shifted over to being that stress reliever, to being my escape from boredom, my escape from pressure. And it's something that, quite frankly, I thought I could manage for a long time. And in some ways I kind of was. But then over time, especially with the advent of internet porn, it just escalated to the point where I could no longer manage it. And as you well know, that's one of the markers of an addiction. So it escalated eventually to my having an affair and cheating on my wife of 13 years, something I never dreamed of doing. And another thing I never dreamed of doing was going through a divorce. And it's because I had become a full-blown sex addict. I was addicted to this relationship with porn and with, having sex with others. and basically was, delusional and totally lost in my addiction, much like a crack cocaine addict or an alcoholic would be, where they're just not making wise choices, and you do things that you swore you would never do.
Right.
And it brought me to the brink of suicide, made me made me suicidal, and really it was only 2 years after my divorce that I got to that point where I hit rock bottom. I literally had a fear of waking up every day because I had never, ever considered taking my own life.
Right.
But all of a sudden I had entertained that. So that was the start of my recovery. That was around the year 2000. Right. And it was really through my recovery that I would say this idea of having a coach or a mentor started to hit me. And, I had been to counselors and therapists and pastors and other people trying to get help, but not really trying, just kind of going through the motions to stay in the marriage and all that kind of stuff. But once I lost the marriage and all that, and after hitting rock bottom, that was the first time that I really wanted to get well on my own. Right. Not because it was a condition of staying in my marriage, but because I just wanted to be a better version of myself. I wanted to be able to overcome this. So I did something that I had not done before, and that was in seeking out help. I wanted somehow inherently, I wanted to go to someone who really understood this. Right. Because the other people that I'd seen, some really renowned therapists and counselors in my area, I really believe that I had pulled the wool over their eyes because I was a world-class liar, you know, and I fooled them, and I fooled them into thinking that the biggest problem in our marriage relationship was my wife, and it wasn't me, So I'd play all those games. You're a world-class liar when you're an addict. But this time I really wanted to get well, and I found a counselor who was a recovering sex addict too.
Okay.
And that was a game changer. So you talk about coaches and all.
Yeah.
Think about our favorite sports teams.
Yep.
Think about like a quarterback coach. Wouldn't you assume that a quarterback coach would have to have been a quarterback himself to be effective?
Well, I would hope so, but the way Dak played,
maybe not for Dallas, but for Seattle.
Well, and it's interesting, Michael, because you brought up this whole idea that, behind this, because the idea of a coach or a mentor is new to some people. And really what you're doing is you're making a bit of a distinction between maybe going to a counselor, which is, there's nothing wrong with going to a counselor, but you're really raising a new idea of going, getting a coach or a mentor in your life versus maybe just counseling. Can you explain in your life the difference? You've kind of
sure, because I've been to both. Been to both. Yeah, I would say, counselors, therapists, these folks are usually, they've gone to school for this. They've been specifically trained in a profession, and they have a lot of tools. They have a lot of things that they can bring to the table. Yep. For instance, if and I do this, I refer, as a mentor, I refer a lot of my guys out to other specialists, what I would call specialists. So a time that I would refer someone to a counselor, either to work with them and me, or sometimes it's just like, you got to go see someone. I'll give you a great example. I had a guy in one of my small groups that he was having real anger issues, and he had shared that he had punched his fist through the wall, getting upset at his wife. And I kind of pulled him aside and said, you know what, you really need to, I know you don't, you've talked about not having a lot of financial resources and all that wherewithal to be able to do this. I said, I would rather you leave sexual addiction recovery and go see an anger management specialist, because I'm worried that one of these days that fist is going to hit your wife's face, and you're going to end up in jail, and things are going to, it sounded pretty bad already, right? So I would say, you need to go find someone who's a specialist, and that's over my pay grade. I'll give you another example that actually can turn a person towards someone with even a higher specialty, like a psychiatrist or what have you. One of the things that I discovered early on in my ministry, quite by chance, was that I was having a real problem with just being able to focus in on the work that I needed to do and to be effective at it. And someone happened to mention to me, they said, have you ever been tested for ADD?
Interesting.
And I was like, wow, no, I haven't. But I know what that is because my younger son had ADD, was on medication,
Right.
and it was so bad for him that the school would literally call sometimes and say, did he take his meds this morning? Because he's not acting like it,
Right.
So I thought, this is worth digging into. Read a book called Driven by Distraction,
Hmm.
which is an incredible book. It's kind of like the first book you need to read if you suspect that you have ADD.
Hmm.
And I went to, back then you would go to a psychologist first for testing,
Yep.
before you would go to a psychiatrist if you were diagnosed and you needed to be prescribed medication, what have you, because that's one of the ways to treat that. And so after I went through my testing, they came back and said, well, on a scale of 1 to 7, you're an 8. Okay. So they said, now you need to go see the psychiatrist, meet with him. And
Yep.
we had more, there was more of a discussion through the intake process of what was your past history like, things like drug, did you ever have any drug use in the past? Yes, I did. Had you ever suffered, concussions or anything like that? Yes, I did. Played football for 13 years, so I did a lot of
Right.
that.
Yep.
And so pretty soon it was clear that, wow, this really is something that needed to be treated. Now, had this gone untreated, I was already told by my mentors and coaches in a new ministry incubator that they were about to flunk me out of their program because I wasn't meeting my milestones.
Right.
I wasn't following through, things like that. And once I got that treated, it was a game changer for me, not only in building my ministry in the very early years, but it made a big change in my recovery because that particular area was dealt with by a specialist, right? A specialized coach, and only they could be able to really help me in this area. By the way, just as a footnote, and I just did a recent monthly training on this in our masterclass program,
Yep.
that it is now proven that about 70% of all sex addicts actually also have ADD or ADHD. Yeah.
Okay, let me press you just for a second. I'd love you to play, like the old country and western Brad Paisley song. If I could go back and speak to myself. I just want to double back because that was a really interesting statement you made about if I did one thing differently, what difference would it have made? Let's go back to when you were trying to find a way and you were in your addiction. If you could have had a coach or a mentor back in those days when it was still the script, regarding your marriage and the script regarding your life was still yet unplayed to its full extent. And I'm also, of course, adding in the proviso that you would have been open to that, which of course, do you see, how do you think that would have played out potentially different?
Well, I believe there's always a qualitative measure whenever you have a coach or a mentor that you're working with. So, I know that my friend Reggie Campbell, who I mentioned, and Radical Mentoring, one of the things they do is they have a different coaching model than we have because I consider us to be specialists. I trained you to be a mentor for people, specifically guys who struggle with sexually addictive behaviors.
Right.
Whereas in their mentoring model, they have guys that are more generalists. So they'll meet with a group of guys once a month and they'll tackle 12 different topics over the course of the year. And one of them will be intimacy and sexuality.
Right.
Another one will be, your work life. Another one will be being a father, and on and on. So I think, again, this hasn't really been available to most people. When you go back to when I was a kid, the only place you saw mentors really was in the workplace.
Right.
And it was typically, I'm a CEO and, we got to figure out who my successor is going to be. And so once they identify who that lucky VP is or senior VP, then what do? They spend some time mentoring them. They show them the ropes. And so I'm not sure that would have been available, but I think in an informal way, it's kind of the older guy taking the younger guy under their wings.
Right.
And the main operative there is to be willing and able. And I was able, but I wasn't willing. And that's what pride does to us, right? Especially when we're in our 20s or, when we're younger, definitely in our teens, we don't want anyone telling us what to do,
right?
But there are people that we look up to. And typically when you're in your teens or whatever, it may be someone in their 20s, but you don't look up to someone in their 40s or 50s, but, unless you're really mature, but you do look up to people a little older than you.
Right.
So there is a dynamic that you can use here, even with the younger kids, that, just find someone who's healthy, resourceful, and whole to be able to model your life off of. For those of us who are older, though, there's really no excuse. There's no excuse for not, going and finding those people and asking them for help.
Now, yeah, and let me say that. Let's say a guy is kind of spinning his wheels, but he's going, you know what? I've kind of I'm in the group, or I'm doing the group,
yeah.
And how is this experience different, or how does it augment a group? Because a lot of guys, I think, have learned, if get your filter, get your group. But I think what I found in my life is sometimes that did not allow me to gear down to the degree that I needed to in my life. And so the guys that are in groups, what does this provide, which is maybe over and above what your typical group dynamic provides?
Well, I think you need to go back to the sports analogy. And when you're talking about a really good mentor or a really good coach, you're not talking about the position coach. What you really need is like an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator or the head coach. Okay, because what do they have? An offensive coordinator has visibility and knowledge about all the position coaches and what needs to be happening there. The head coach has an understanding of how all the pieces fit and work together. So let me give you an example of how that works in recovery. A really good mentor will have had enough experience in all these different areas to be able to guide you in terms of even thinking what kind of a group to join. All right. So for instance, there are 12-step groups. My wife and I talk about this all the time. She hates 12-step. She's never been in it, but she's heard me describe it. And she said, I want to have crosstalk. I'm not robotic. I'm not, hey, this is Mike. Hey, Mike, she wants it more free flowing and all. And quite frankly, if you're further on in recovery, let's say you've been in recovery for several years, you really need more than that. But if you're just starting out, that's the safest place for you to probably be because you're scared. You don't know what to expect. So, just like a head coach knows a brand new quarterback needs to spend more time with the older experienced quarterback and with the coaches, they don't need to be, thrown right into the fire and starting the first game, that they take the field. So it's just understanding all those things. And I do this with my mentees all the time. And I know you do this as well, Vern. You kind of size up a person, figure out, okay, are they just now for the first time doing recovery of any kind? Like I've never been to a group, never been to a counselor, never done anything. And their first question is, what do I do? Right?
And maybe they haven't even disclosed to their wife or, like all of that is just, I didn't know where to start.
Exactly. Yeah. So a good qualified mentor will be able to guide them on those kinds of things. Now, you also may get someone, and I had a guy who came to me years ago who said, I've been in recovery for a couple of years, been doing well, but now I'm in a committed relationship and I'm realizing that I'm having to learn some new things. Like I'm not doing so well in the area of healthy intimacy where it's not sexual, things like that. So I'd like to come to you and maybe work with you for about 6 months to kind of reestablish and reaffirm my recovery, because I'm finding that I'm tempted to go back to the material or what have you. So a person who hasn't experienced that, and this is really important. It's actually, John Maxwell uses this phrase or this principle. He calls it the law of the lid. And the law of the lid is basically you can't really help anyone in an area that's beyond your proficiency, right? So, for instance, I know that you're a pastor and you've spent years as a pastor. I've never been a pastor. Okay. So if I had someone who comes to me as a pastor, I can help them to a degree in terms of, helping them with their recovery from sexual addiction. But when it comes with the nuances of how do I relate that to my profession? Should I step down? Do I continue to deal with this? That's the law of the lid says that's beyond what I've experienced. So if I was smart, I would tell them, listen, I got a friend, Vern Tomke, who probably would be really great for you to spend some time with. Maybe, in fact, you should even shift over and start to work with him as your mentor instead of with me. So there's a lot of different ways to treat that, but basically, again, there's always qualitative measures of what you get as a mentor. And this is what I love about mentoring. Like when you came along, I was thrilled because now it's like, wow, for all the pastors and church, church leaders out there who
Mm-hmm.
are struggling and need specific help, I knew you could help the average guy, but I
Right.
also knew that you had a specialization. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, what I love is when I see a guy who comes out of the computer industry, or is in the computer industry for 20 years like I
Yep.
was, it's
Yep.
like I love to work with those guys,
Right.
especially the introverts, the techies and stuff, because even though I'm not a techie, I've worked around them all my life, and I kind of get their world and understand how you can live in
Mm.
your head like that. So the beauty of mentors is, take the time, invest the time to go find someone that's a good match for you.
Right.
That's a good match for what you need, and of course that requires some level of maturity and understanding of how to go about that. You do the same thing, by the way, or you should, when you're looking for a counselor or a therapist.
Right.
Like when someone came to me and said, have you ever been tested for ADD? I didn't go to a counselor who had no experience in ADD.
Right.
I wanted to take the shortest, quickest path to being able to get healthy. And that's what a good mentor or a good coach does.
And that brings up the idea, I've been thinking through, I was out for a walk this morning and thinking through this interview and, what makes for a good coach or mentor. And, this idea around, first of all, you mentioned was experience. I want somebody
Yeah.
who gets it, who
Yeah.
understands what I'm going through. I went to a counselor once and they go, well, I've never struggled with porn, and it's like, I don't want to hear anything else. You don't get it. That was the
Yeah.
first one. The second one, I want somebody who has some knowledge about this area, and somebody who's been trained and has some subject matter
Yeah.
knowledge. But the third one I want you to talk about is the idea of, I want somebody who's experienced some success in this area. And you have this great imagery of a Sherpa guide.
Mm-hmm.
And I know when I got involved in mentoring with you and some of your groups as well, you used to talk about a Sherpa guide. Just for the listeners, just share what you meant by a Sherpa guide, because for me that was so helpful, because I had been trying for years to help guys who I hadn't been really up to the mountain, but I was trying to help guys a little bit further down than me. But tell me what
Yeah.
you meant by a Sherpa guide.
Well, I've always been fascinated by Mount Everest, and obviously the difficulty of ascending the world's tallest mountain. And of course that's where the term Sherpa comes from. Sherpa are actually people that grow up in that area. They're indigenous to that area, but they're really marked by the fact that they have been the guides for
Mm-hmm.
so many people, going all the way to the very first person who ever ascended the mountain and summited. They've been the guides to be able to take them up, and not just take them up, but get them back safely.
Right.
So to me, what's interesting about the Sherpas when you read up on them is most of them have very little education. Most of them don't have a lot of world experience outside of that geographic area, but they know that mountain inside and out. In fact, I think the most successful or most famous Sherpa has ascended to the summit of Mount Everest, I think, almost 20 times,
Wow.
which is just amazing if you think
Yeah.
about it, where, big part of the journey is, you have to be on oxygen. So yeah, to me, it was kind of, the comparison was this, okay, who would you rather have lead you, in this death-defying act of summiting Mount Everest? Who would you rather have lead you as your guide, as your Sherpa? The kid who is, or the guy who's maybe 30 years old, who's made 6 or 7 trips up there, lives in the area, knows the weather, knows the conditions, can probably do it blindfolded, right?
Knows where all the
Or would you,
knows where all the crevasses
well,
are.
knows where all the crevasses are, knows
Yeah.
when to hit the ice fall and when not to, everything. Or would you rather have a person who's far more educated? Maybe he's a professor of geology or
Yeah.
geography or what have you. Maybe he's the most intelligent and informed and educated person on the Himalayas, right? He
Right.
knows far more than the Sherpa guide. He's far more educated. He's got the PhD and he's a professor at Harvard or whatever, but yet he's never been to the top of
Right.
Mount Everest. Who would you rather have lead you? And I think what happens is sometimes we forget the incredible importance of experience and everything that comes along with it. Because if you've never walked in my shoes, if you've never experienced what it feels like to have the guilt and the shame
Right.
of being up until 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, looking at porn and masturbating, while you know that you've got a board meeting at 8 a.m. that you're supposed to be presenting a major proposal to a big client, and you compromise your life in that way. When you risk your, when your sexual activity means that you're risking the health and well-being of your spouse, because there's always a risk of getting an STD or whatever. Unless you've ever dealt with that duplicity and that intense shame, you don't understand my world. And you don't understand what makes me such a great pathological compulsive liar as, an addict who's not in recovery. I think another thing that goes along with this, and you're talking about the qualifications, a really important one to me, Vern, is brokenness. It's brokenness and humility. It's the humility of knowing that, you know what, I'm really only a couple bad decisions away from being that person all over again. A really great mentor or a really great Sherpa guide is one who doesn't assume that he can be careless on the trail, but it's one that continues to look ahead, continues to look for, the hazards that they may not have seen before, what have you. And also they continue to be learners themselves. So I think having that humility and having that brokenness of knowing, you know what, this is a life or death issue. This was a life and death issue for me, and it could be for them, takes it seriously and really gives the person their all. I think that's incredibly important as well. When I get to the day where I think I know everything about recovery, I'm in big trouble. Which is one of the reasons why we do the virtual summits. And you were in that summit, in one of our summits, where we gather together, 30, 40, 50 experts in this area. I tell you what, I didn't expect it when I started doing that, but I love doing that because I learned so much. Because like every person, you included, is telling me things and showing me things and teaching me things that I never knew before. And then I just get really thrilled about being able to share that the way we do, through the summits and through the masterclass that we've created, which is really a daily discipline based way to be able to go through that.
Yeah. And Michael, I am so indebted just to the areas you provided here. Just in closing, just describe a little bit more, because you put together some really great resources for people. And I've been, like I say, been a part of them, but I've also been on the receiving end. Just in closing, just say a little bit about what you and your wife, Christine, are doing in this area for not just men, but women as well. And just give the listeners a bit of an idea, because I'm a firm believer that we need a wide support net for people, because different resources are going to help people in different ways.
That's right. Yeah. And we've taken it a step further. We really are trying to move towards democratizing access to the best thinking in the world in this area of faith-based recovery. So that's kind of our specialty zone. I got to say, first of all, huge credit to my wife, who's now our co-CEO. So she and I are co-CEOs. She is the digital marketing brains, but also has an incredible heart for women that are going through this, both the betrayed spouse as well as the struggler. But our ministry is Brave Hearts. You can go to it at bravehearts.org and learn about this, or braveheartsuniversity.com. But really, we narrow things down into this kind of one roadmap that we have. We believe that recovery doesn't end at sobriety. We think that recovery and healing goes on to living a redemptive life. That's our faith-based perspective as Christ followers, which simply means that we've seen a lot of people get stuck just going to recovery group meetings and trying to stay sober. And they may stay sexually sober, but they're not really growing in their relationship with God and with others. They may be the dry drunk around their spouse. They're not really growing in healthy intimacy with them. So one of the things we talk about is going through these 4 stages. The first one is you kind of enter recovery being what we call hopeful. So you go from hopelessness to being hopeful. Then hopeful is just you're looking for a reason to keep showing up, right? This is the very early stages of recovery.
Sure.
And then the next stage is being gutsy. That's where all the heavy lifting is. That's where the tough work is. That's where having to do a disclosure, going through abstinence, showing up when you don't want to show up to the meetings. So these first 2 stages are really focused. The addict or the spouse is really focused on themselves. and really focused on what do I need to do to get healthy, to repair the damage that's been done, and to try to get well. But somewhere in there, we see people transition over. In the 12-step world, it's referred to as the 12th step. It's, now that I'm experiencing this freedom or sobriety or whatever you want to call it, now I want to start giving that gift to others, right? Sharing the successes with others. So we call that the third stage, which is going from gutsy to braveful. So these are the first efforts that, for instance, when you first stepped into helping other guys, even before you became a mentor and went through our mentor training, we see this with people who are volunteering to lead a small group, in this area, or volunteering to do a book study or something like that. So braveful is where you're still working on your own recovery. You're still doing the basic blocking and tackling of recovery, but now you're starting to help others. And then the fourth stage is what we call, that's the great one where you're living a courageous life. You're heroic. So you go from being braveful to heroic. You're in the heroic stage. You're doing the podcast. You went through the mentor training. You're mentoring guys. This is in your blood now, and you're just passionate about it. And I am too. And so our mentor training program that we put together that you went through, it's a 16-week online program. We supplement that with some group work that people can do as they kind of go through this process. But for the most part, it's self-study and self-paced. And that's for the folks who are kind of in that, braveful, moving towards heroic stage. They've established themselves in a healthy way through their recovery or through their healing process with trauma, and now they want to give back to others. So we have a great program for that, and you can see that all on bravehearts.org, and the course contents in braveheartsuniversity.com. But we've also created these two other amazing vehicles. I mentioned the virtual summits, which we typically only do once a year. Our last virtual summit was focused on the women who are, spouses of strugglers. We call that the Braveful Summit. We had over 4,500 people attend, and it was amazing. And we make that content available from all these different experts for usually for 48 hours for people to watch for free. And then if they want to, they can get an all access pass and have lifetime access to that. So we've done 4 of those so far, and we've got one coming up this December, which is a little different twist for us. It's going to be the separation and divorce recovery summit. Huge. So because we know that's a big issue for a lot of folks related to this. And then the third piece of this, Vern, which is one that we just launched a year ago, and we're really excited. And this came at the behest of people who were saying, we love the all access passes. We love having 80 plus hours of content of these amazing interviews you do with all these experts in these fields. But, could you repackage it maybe in a way that's a little easier for us to consume? And that's what we created when we created Masterclass. So again, you can go to braveheartsuniversity.com or bravehearts.org and learn more about Masterclass. But Masterclass is really us focusing in on this principle that is an old principle born out of 12-step about taking it one day at a time.
Absolutely.
And what I've learned in mentoring men is the number one thing that they've come back to tell me is their big success breaker, success factor in establishing long-term sexual sobriety is that they try to spend time every day with God, growing their relationship with God, and they spend time every day working on their recovery. So we took that and kind of repackaged the content from those summits, and we call it Daily Disciplines. It's at the core of our masterclass, and we have people that are going through. We have so much content in there. It's like Netflix, basically, but we also have it structured and programmatic, so a person can go in and spend anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes a day. That's as much as we want them to do, because the key is that you show up more often than not, right? So if you're showing up, 3 or 4 or 5 times a week doing your daily disciplines, you're going to make progress in your recovery, because what you feed grows and what you starve dies. So, those are the main components that we offer. We're really excited about kind of where we're at. We have several hundred people that are members in Masterclass. It's $30 a month. They can come and go as they will. It's a month-to-month deal. But we have people that are coming back giving us some amazing success stories of how it's, helping them experience freedom for the first time in their life. Because again, they're hearing, they have virtual mentors, if you will. And now we have over 100 experts that are represented in all of those different formats. So it's not just me speaking, not just hearing from Vern, but they're hearing from 100 of the best and brightest minds of faith-based recovery and trauma healing.
Well, Michael, I want to end on this quote I've heard from you, and you're describing one of your favorite phrases is a redemptive life. And I think it's from you that I'm going to falsely attribute it to you if you didn't say it, is, the enemy has robbed so much from us, stolen, killed, and destroyed us. And I love this idea that, as we find recovery and we find a redemptive life, that we are taking revenge on the enemy and
sticking it to the enemy.
Sticking it to the enemy. So
that's right.
Kudos to you and the organization. Thanks. And everything you brought into my life. So the listeners, I really encourage you to check that out, and really encourage you to think about just what would it look like to get a coach and mentor for your life to take you to a new place. So God bless everybody. We'll see you next week on the podcast. And again, Michael, thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks, Vern. Appreciate it. I'm proud of all the work that you're doing. You're doing a great job. Keep it up.
Thank you.